All right, so the only thing that I don't have posted on D2L right now is the student presentation, the student um session. So I'll post that after class. And but other than that, everything should be up on D2L. There is a discussion post this week, and I just want to highlight a couple questions in the discussion post. So discussion post is kind of normal, talk about readings, the lecture, the notes. But the questions are, what are your thoughts about using feminist theory for everyone, not just women? And what were some of your early gender role messages? We're going to talk about both those in our lecture. But those are the two questions. But don't forget to respond to the readings and lecture as well. Um, so this was really this theory, feminist theory. When I started out, I wasn't, I was unfamiliar with feminist theory, and I wasn't sure how applicable it would be for me, being a white male uh, in this field. Um, but it became one of my favorite theories. Um, and I use it all the time. It's great not only for females, but any gender identity, not only individuals, but especially relationships. And I'll tell you about why as we move through the theory. Um, so you know we're moving as we move through these theories, we're also moving through time. So it's almost like a history lesson for our field. We started in Vienna with Freud uh, and some other people. And now, we're in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, not that long ago, during the civil rights movement. Uh, so, a lot of this is taking place throughout the United States, but the center is California. And so we've really made that journey, not only in location and schools of thought, but also through time. And I think that as we move through schools of thought, um, kind of the way we look at human beings and issues and personalities, and I think the theory nuances and content has really changed with each school of thought as well, not only in location, but in time period. And here, with feminist theory, is really one of the most advanced changes in contemporary theoretical application. So a lot of things were happening at once during this time period. You kind of think about the late 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot's going on. We have the civil rights movement, which really talks about equality, especially equality between races and ethnic groups and culture, and move towards multicultural ideals and equality. And I think that at the same time, uh, there is this movement between males and females and, the whole feminist movement. And all of this was going on at the same time. So there were a lot of cultural changes happening. And even though, even if we look at the 70s, that was over 50 years ago. And we still have a lot more strides to make. We still have a long way to go in equality. If we look at things like pay scales, we look at bias, not only between males and females, but any gender identity. It's a lot bias and prejudice is alive and well today, unfortunately. So because this was such a large movement, there wasn't just one theorist. I listed some of the more well-known theorists who wrote books and articles on this theory and who were leaders in the field. Jean Miller, Carolyn Enns wrote a pretty good book, Olivia Espin, Laura Brown, but this is just a few. So no one person is identified with feminist theory. But of course, the equal rights movement, feminist movement, all of these cultural movements, they each had a general theme to them of equality, but each one was also applied to a specific area of academia as well. So, you would have this example, of it being applied to not only counseling or counseling issues, but how we counsel, how we incorporate these ideas in therapy. There were large shifts in other fields like religion and theology, art, across the board, basically. There are some different terms that I'll explain to you. But I think more importantly, after we go over kind of the vocabulary and the terms, what I found most helpful is how do we incorporate this in individual and group therapy or couples counseling? So let's look at some of the terms first and some of the philosophical orientations, and then we'll move on to how to use this in therapy. So terms of types of feminism, especially within the field of counseling. The liberal feminist focused on helping women over some of the limits and constraints of their socialization patterns. Their goals include personal empowerment, dignity, self-fulfillment, equality. Cultural feminist, oppression is seen as the result of societal devaluation of women's strengths. The goal is to infuse society with values based on cooperation. Radical feminist looks at the oppression of women embedded in patriarchy. Their goals to transform gender relationships, societal institutions, women's sexual procreative self-determinations. And socialist feminist position is that there are multiple oppressions and solutions to problems, which should include class, race, and other discrimination. The goal is to transform social relationships. So we know, and I even talked about how most of the early psychological theories were biased in some way. They were all, upper middle class to wealthy, European males who came up with the early theories. Their clients were usually upper middle class European females, and there was a lot of bias in the theories. We talked about this specifically with Freud, but every early theory had some bias to it. And if the bias isn't obvious, then we can at least say that equality was not emphasized. So there are some very specific concepts, core concepts that feminist theory incorporates. Feminist theory is gender-free because it explains gender differences in terms of socialization processes rather than on the basis of true nature. So it's more involved with the effect of our socialization process on the individual rather than basically how we are born. Second one is it's flexible. The strategies used are applied equally to individuals or groups in spite of age, race, culture, gender or sexual orientation. So I used to teach the multicultural class, and I usually liked the term diversity the best because multicultural includes the word culture, which is only one aspect of diversity. Diversity can include everything from ageisms to gender identity, to socioeconomic level, to where we live in the world. So there's so many things that can be included in diversity. When we talk about culture, the old thoughts were basically, well, we should learn about different cultures, and I'm all for that. I love learning about different cultures. But one thing I did learn about different cultures is that it's impossible to learn about all the cultures. There's so many, and there are subcultures and subgroupings within every culture. And there are so many subgroupings that it could go down to the family level. So every family has its own culture. Every community, every city, every state or territory, every country, or perhaps there are other ways to differentiate other than physical boundaries. So that's another thing. How do we identify cultures? Well, there's so many different ways to identify the various aspects of culture. So what do we do? Because it's impossible for one individual to truly understand all the nuances of every culture. And we never know what client we're going to get sitting in the chair across from us. So, yes, it's good to learn about all the different cultures, but on the other hand, I think the most important attribute that we can have, it begins with those Rogerian kind of characteristics, basically, being non-judgmental and accepting other individuals unconditionally for who they are, being genuine ourselves, which also means if we have our own bias, and everybody does because we're brought up in an imperfect world, at least we need to identify our bias so that we can make positive changes in ourselves and our outlooks. And then, of course, being genuine, being accepting, and being empathic towards the other person, trying to truly identify with how they are feeling in their given situation and trying to understand their own subjective reality. So I think that's the starting point. Part of those characteristics include wanting to learn about the other person, the other human being, all aspects of who they are, what makes them who they are, which includes both who they are, who they're born to be, what experiences they've had, what struggles they've gone through, what they would like to deal with. So, I think we have to be open to a better understanding of all of those human domains with our clients. And I think it's important that we be open to talking not only about our differences, but that I don't understand everything they've experienced. But I'd like to learn, I'd like them to share that with me and to trust me enough to feel safe in sharing that with me. A lot of this lack of understanding is simply because we have not experienced these things ourselves. Personal example would be that when I went to college, I was in a dorm in Duquesne, and down the hall there was a black male who was, I don't know, 6'5", and nobody wanted to be his roommate. So I traded rooms and I became his roommate, and we became best friends. But just that first instance of nobody wanting to be his roommate, I didn't really think anything of it at the time. But as I spent a few years with him, and we would do things together, like go downtown Pittsburgh and go shopping together, or eat at a restaurant, or go to the movies, I noticed how people would treat him differently and how he would experience prejudice on a daily basis. I never realized this because I had not experienced the same level of prejudice. But just by spending time with him, and us being treated differently, I had this new realization of what prejudice truly was. And it was definitely a learning experience for me. And I gained a lot more empathy, and the struggle for, equality and civil rights, even more in more recent years, became more tangible for me. It had new meaning for me. So, but I think that, every single human being has not experienced what other people have experienced. And so, we have to gain understanding about other people's experiences in life. And part of that is building a trusting relationship with our clients. Another example, a more feminist example is simply, my life being married for the last 15 years, understanding the bias and prejudice just living with my wife that she experiences at different times. So, I think every human being we meet, even though they might seem that they're happy and have their life all together, every human being is going through some kind of struggle. And whether they mention it or not, we meet somebody and we say, "Hey, how you doing?" And they say, "Fine." "How are you doing?" And you say, "Fine." But in reality, everybody's dealing with some kind of struggle, whether it's big or small. Um, and I think part of being a good therapist is trying to have some empathy for another person's feelings and their struggles. Just a few other things. Feminist theory is interactionist, which includes dimensions of human experience like thinking, feeling, behaving, giving account for contextual and environmental factors. So I would just call that multidimensional. Lifespan perspective, it looks at human development throughout our entire life from birth to death, and that process. Change can occur at any time throughout our human development. There is a section of the notes that talks about personality development. You can read that. They have different concepts. These concepts of personality development have changed over the years. So you might agree with some more than others. What I'd really like to talk about is how to use this theory in therapy. And I think that it does work well for any sex, any gender identity. I think it works really well for couples. And it doesn't matter whether the couple is like a male-female couple or whether it's, any LGBTQ combination. I think it works for couples in general really well. So if we think about it, even if two people come from the same town, they've probably experienced different things and different aspects of culture, or even different cultures as they grew up. So when we think about gender stereotypes, these are kind of I would say projections or expectations based on bias or prejudice that we place on others. And, the result of stereotypes is often gender role messaging. So gender role messages are really these concepts or expectations that are placed upon us by others, basically from birth, from that point on. So, some examples of gender role messaging that are based on stereotypes and misconceptions. Women are often expected to be more kind, thoughtful, caring, nurturing than men. Women are not expected to display independence or assertiveness because they're viewed as taking on masculine roles. Women are seen as being emotional and intuitive, labeled as submissive, passive, home-oriented, indecisive. Women don't behave in these ways, then they're often viewed as unfeminine. Women are viewed to naturally have an interest in relationships versus accomplishments. Those are just a few. When we think about this, it's not just women that receive gender role messages. Males receive gender role messaging as well. I was taught at a very young age that I should not express my emotions. Big boys don't cry. How many of you have heard that phrase? You know, act like a man, be responsible. I'm going to be gone on vacation, or I'm going off to a business meeting, so you're in charge, you're the guy, all these different gender role messages. But I think that imagine gender role messages for the LGBTQ community. So they also receive gender role messages, usually based on their sex and outward appearance growing up, but it may not be what they identify with personally. But every human being receives some kind of gender role message, and most of them are based on stereotype and bias. And when two people come together in a relationship, they each place expectations on each other based on the messages they received growing up. They also internalize those messages. They think, oh, I shouldn't be this emotional. I should be more macho or masculine or whatever it is. I should be more caring, whatever it is, whatever the message is. We tend to internalize them and place expectations on our partners. Well, their partner might not have the same gender role message as you expect. And so that leads to conflict and anxiety in the relationship because you're not meeting the other individual's expectations. Haven't gotten to that point where we accept each person unconditionally for who they truly are. So true love and intimacy isn't based on expectations. It's based on unconditional love and acceptance. So I think that a lot of people place expectations on others or judge others with bias rather than simply being present for them and asking them who they are and what their preferences are. What would they like to do or be, or what do they think or feel? We expect more than we listen. So I think this is kind of like the basis for my personal couples therapy. I want to find out. I want people to share what their gender role messages were growing up, because they probably never told their partner what they were. What was it like? Or maybe what bias they experienced, or, how they have internalized some of the messages, but it's really not what or who they want to be. I also want them to share gender role expectations. And what are some of the expectations they have for the other person? And are they accurate? Is this something the other person wants? Maybe it's not. And then I have them express what they truly want in a relationship. Who do they want to be? And just this very basic communication has often never been discussed in the relationship. And then we delve into kind of where these expectations and gender role messages came from. And perhaps it was one dominating parent, or perhaps they were in a single parent home. Perhaps it was society, a mixture of experiences. Often, it's a way to cope with bias and prejudice. I'm going to act a certain way because I don't want to be treated badly. I don't want to be judged. I just want to fit in, you know. Um, so I know that both my wife and I are therapists. So, when we had kids, uh, we didn't want them to experience like bias or gender role messages. So, we didn't paint rooms pink or blue. We picked neutral colors like sunshine yellow or green or things like that. We thought about their toys, and you would not believe how difficult it is to find neutral clothing colors or neutral toys that both any gender can play with. Um, and we would try to watch television that was educationally based, like PBS and Sesame Street. But even on these really well thought out programs, there's still gender bias. So, you know, each one of my kids, I got 4 kids, each one's very different. My my oldest daughter is bisexual. My the next child is a male. He would fit kind of like a stereotypical male, playing with trucks and his style of dress and everything else, but it's still his choice. It's what he wants. The next girl is, somewhat feminine, and but once again playing with dolls. But once again, her choice. And then our youngest does a little bit of everything because he's influenced by all of the older kids. But even like thinking about what toys to get them, trying to figure out what they would like rather than what is advertised for them. It's a very difficult process because our society is just filled with these expectations, bias, whatever. I didn't see it yet, but have any of you seen the Barbie movie? It's kind of talks about some of this stuff and some of the gender role messages that people get. And now Barbie's doing a little better. They have Barbies of all body types. They have Barbies of all different races and all different professions. So the dolls are getting a little better, a little more, a little less bias. Let's see. So part of the counseling process is really communication and an exploration of the gender role messages we received, we internalized, and turned into expectations for friends, significant others, partners, family. A lot of times I might do family therapy and one parent has certain gender role messages and expectations, and they're very different than the other parent. And so there's some conflict about expectations that they might have for one another, for themselves, but also for their kids. And so it creates a family system discussion. But so the sharing and revealing of this history of where these messages came from, of how they became expectations, and then a processing of, are they expectations for oneself? Are these expectations you want to own? Or do you want different expectations for self? Do you feel trapped or stuck or living a false identity? What would you like your own messages to be if you could make up your own role messages? What would they be for you? And then I want them to hear each other's. And then we talk about what love and intimacy truly is and how people have expectations instead of unconditional positive regard and acceptance and things like that. How, it is difficult to truly experience love and be in the present for another person if we're always trying to meet expectations instead of being accepted for who we truly are. So I think this theory is, even though its origins are with, feminist equality in the 60s, I think it really applies to every human being and can be expanded for all of us. I think it brings about a lot of personal awareness and awareness in relationships. I think it brings about a lot of communication and self-exploration. And, I think that there's also kind of a freedom that we get when we realize, wow, I'm living this way because of other people's expectations. It's not really genuine. If I want to be genuine, this is who I am. And, I've heard a lot of clients say, well, I never knew that was something you liked or enjoyed, or I never knew you really disliked that or felt uncomfortable with that. So it really changes dynamics. Another thing I want to say is if I do couples therapy, the first thing I say is that the goal of therapy is for both individuals to find acceptance and happiness. And that might be working on a relationship and remaining together, or it may mean going your separate ways. And that's for them to discover. Either way, I don't see separation as a failed therapy, as long as the individuals are happy with the resolution. So I think that's a slightly different take on relationship or couples counseling. It's great if they're happier than ever together and healthier. But either way, I want them to be healthy individuals. Once they get to that point, even if that relationship ends, the next relationship will be healthier because they'll look at the concept of relationship and acceptance of others in a totally different way. It's hopefully a lot healthier. All right, so feminist psychology has some key concepts. The personal is political. Fundamental goal of feminist therapy is social transformation societal reorganization frees men and women from the constraints placed by gender role expectations. I would call this, like, our program really supports advocacy and positive change, both at the individual level, couples, family, societal systems. Counseling relationship is one of equals. Women's experiences are honored in order to understand their distress. The goal of therapy is to replace the patriarchal objective truth with feminist consciousness that acknowledges a diverse way of knowing. And, I think this is based on equality and diversity and acceptance. Reformulating the meaning of distress and mental illness, intrapsychic and interpersonal experiences are only a part of the explanation for the pain. Distress is seen as communication about an unjust system, while pain is seen as evidence of resistance and the skill or will to survive. So I used to talk about this in multicultural counseling class as well. If an individual experiences persistent prejudice and bias, that can result in some diagnosis because it actually creates anxiety, perhaps paranoia. If somebody's going to, follow somebody around a store to make sure they're not stealing something because they're prejudiced, that would heighten somebody's anxiety and paranoia. So a lot of times, a diagnosis, rather than seen as something that is within an individual, can be transformed into the realization that it is a result of an oppressive society on an individual. It doesn't come from within, it is exposure to the bias of society. Reformulating that meaning of distress and mental illness. The use of an integrated analysis of oppression, the therapist recognizes that women and men are affected by a culture in which they were reared, where the sexes are differentially privileged. And this theory focuses on sexes, primarily male and female. This can easily be expanded to any gender identity. And more importantly, it can be expanded to any group that is oppressed in some way. So pick anything that fits in the category of diversity, and I think this theory works well with it. Therapeutic goals: become aware of our own gender role socialization process, identify internalized gender role messages, replace it with our own constructive beliefs that are positive, that relate to who our genuine selves truly are. Understand how sexist and oppressive societal beliefs influence them in negative ways. Learn skills that'll promote change in society and develop a variety of behaviors that are freely chosen of our own will. There are techniques at the end of the notes, and it's everything from like bibliotherapy, reading books about this subject, to self-disclosure, assertiveness training, group therapy, support groups. What I'd like you to do when you have this question on your exam, one of the techniques you must use in part 2 of the exam question, which is the therapy session, is helping Sam to understand his gender role messages that he grew up with, most likely from his father, and helping him to create his own messages that match better with who he is as an individual. So that is not listed as a technique, but it's really the number one technique. And then you can pick any of the other techniques as a second technique. But let's say you pick bibliotherapy. All right. Don't just say, oh, we're going to have Sam use some bibliotherapy. He's going to read some good books on this subject. Oh, what book would he read? What would that book be about? How would it apply to Sam as opposed to somebody else? If he was in a support group, what kind of support group would Sam be in? And how would it help him? So don't just list a technique from that list. It has to apply to Sam. And how would it apply to Sam? All right. That is feminist therapy. I was wondering if anybody had any questions or if anybody would like to share any of their gender role messages that they had growing up. Go ahead.
When I was talking about expectations, like if I were to grow up, I would not want to have any expectations. Does that make sense? Like, literally just like that way, it's like you stress, like, oh, you have to master your career, you have to do this and that. So I think that's like perfect.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, that would be nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so I'm one of three boys, and so I think that in a way it shapes like a lot of my gender thinking because it wasn't a matter of like, oh, your sister's gonna do this chore. It was, no, all three of you do the same chore, and so I do wonder, I'm like, were my parents really good, or was it just a matter of circumstance? Like, how would it have changed?
What would have been like if you weren't all male children?
Yeah, would one of us have been like, given laundry dishes instead of like, no, all of you guys are gonna do it at some point. So
yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, if you have a male and female parent that are together, are their gender roles varied, or do they both kind of help out doing the same thing?
In my house, I would actually say my dad did like 90% of the housework because my mom she was a doctorate student, and then now she always worked more than my dad. So my dad actually, I don't think I've ever seen my mom like go in the bathroom. I think I've ever seen her do that, or like wash dishes, and that's not slight on my mom.
Yeah.
Plenty part of it. She does all the sorts of stuff. It's like
then yeah, well, based on that, then I'm guessing that it wouldn't matter what the gender of the children was. You would probably all be equally treated.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, Joe was doing it. So I don't know. I think in that way that kind of helped out. My dad, at the same time, my dad's a very masculine guy. He's a state trooper. So like, then when he comes home, he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna make dinner tonight because he likes making dinner.
Nice. What else? Did you have something?
My dad never, my mom did everything, but she also made all the decisions. And it's like, I just looked at my mom and everything. But at the same time, I got treated like I wasn't allowed to cry or show
Hmm.
Those two girls, but yeah, we cried. We were fun to cry. Yeah, no emotion really. So it's like, go to your room. Not necessarily my mom, but my dad. My mom was kind of weird with it too, but she was just always working. She did her doctorate degree at that time, working, just cleaning the house, doing everything. So my whole life, I've just seen like women as very powerful.
Nice.
My dad is a good person, but I just saw her being like she was like a superhero, and he just kind of like went to work and then told me not to cry.
Wow. All right. Anybody else? Anybody online want to share anything?
gender roles in my house, my mom worked out of the house and I actually had a stay-at-home dad. So it was definitely, as you were speaking through that, the way he was treated by, other male family members was definitely something that stuck with myself and my siblings.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So even if you had a less traditional home life, people outside of the home would still criticize or be biased. Yeah. Yeah, I had a extremely, well, fairly traditional parents. My father was in the military. I don't know how traditional this is. So when he would put us to bed, instead of reading us a story, he would stand in between my brother and my room and twirl his rifle and do all kinds of tricks with it. And, you know, I guess, I guess one of my first gifts was a gun. That's probably, maybe that's a Pennsylvania thing. I don't know. But but it was definitely, I think, military life or any life that has an association with kind of I don't know, larger organization has its own culture as well. So um, and then by the time I was 18, hey, are you going to join the military? No, I've been in the military for 18 years. So no, kind of the opposite. I'm quite the pacifist now. All right. Well, if nobody else wants to share, we'll call it a day. And I will see you next week.